Thank you everyone for joining the Corporate Venture Capital panel at Digital RESI June. This is actually the very first panel of this conference, so really excited to kick off this 3-day program with this panel. We have a great lineup of people who are actively investing as part of corporate venture capitals across all different backgrounds. So, and I'm really excited to have Nick from J&J Innovation moderate this panel. So I don't want to make my intro too long, so I'll just quickly turn it over to you, Nick.
Thanks so much, Claire. Hi, I'm Nick Morless. It's a real pleasure to be hosting today's panel on corporate venture capital. This is a very rich topic that I'm excited to dig into. And to set the stage, I'm going to ask each panel member to briefly introduce themselves and then give an overview of their fund from a high level. What are they trying to achieve by engaging in early stage investing? And what are some of the key features that they're looking for in an early stage company? And then we'll follow that with a more kind of granular discussion around some of the key issues and opportunities for entrepreneurs that are seeking venture capital from a strategic. So with that, I'll turn it over to Miles, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off with your background and an overview of your fund.
Sure, thanks, Nick. Happy to see a good number of folks joining the audience. I saw the numbers tick up quickly, so we've got a good number of folks, and I think we'll have hopefully time to address some questions that come on. My name's Miles Gerson. I'm a partner at Takeda Ventures. We are the corporate venture arm of Takeda. We focus majorly on early stage investments, typically preclinical. Our investment amounts range from 5 to 10 million, and we typically do tranche. Given that these are early stage investments, we like to set some development goals for our investments. We take active roles in our investments, so typically board seats, but we are strategically aligned, as you can imagine, with the interests of Takeda. So that is actually very easily determined by going to our website, takedaventures.com, and you'll see the strategic areas of interest: oncology, GI, neuro, and rare, but there are some subcategories to that as well. So I really encourage the attendees to go and look at that website before reaching out, because I think you can actually better message to us. So I'll pause there and in the interest of time, let some of my other panelists describe their funds.
Terrific. Thanks so much for kicking us off, Miles. Ashley, would you like to go next?
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Ning. I'm a director at Mckesson Ventures, which is the venture arm of Mckesson. My background is largely focused in healthcare and tech services, both on the operating and investing side. Previously at IBM Watson Health, and prior to that in healthcare growth equity. So Mckesson Ventures, we've been around for 5 to 6 years. We have a portfolio of about 30 plus investments, and we focus on investing across digital health. I'd say with the exception of med tech, traditional med device, and biotech. We look at late venture to early stage growth, initial check size 5 to 10 million, and we are maybe over the lifetime investment 20 to 25. It sort of really depends on the investment, especially in this environment. And we are a small team of about 7 people and sit in San Francisco. So feel free to also learn more about us on our website. And I'd say if I could draw on areas of interest, I'd say we, again, broadly focus across digital health, but growing areas of trends for us would be clinical, commercial, biopharma services, oncology, given Mckesson's strategic relevance there, and always thinking about sort of the retail transformation as we think about pharmacy.
Gotcha. Terrific, Ashley. Thank you. Ben, would you like to go next?
Well, thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everybody from London. I head up InHealth Ventures. Background is broadly in healthcare, so clinical and orthopedic resident, working in management consulting in healthcare. Worked in early stage healthcare analytics business over on the East Coast, and then was a hospital administrator in the NHS back in the UK. InHealth Ventures is an early stage fund. We invest in seed Series A deals typically. We have a portfolio that's split 50-50 between US and Europe, with a focus broadly on digital health and medtech, both leading and co-investing in deals. InHealth, I guess, is probably a bit different from some of the other companies on this panel in that it's pretty small. It's a sub-billion-dollar turnover business, and is very much focused on, rather than necessarily acquiring future portfolio companies, focused on looking to learn and also looking to generate an ROI on the financial side. So we will work with UK and European-based companies to help them enter the NHS, but also help them get over to the US. And then on the US portfolio side, particularly later stage companies, we'll support them around internationalizing and using InHealth's experience, network, and expertise commercially to do that.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Ben. Juan?
Yes, thank you so much. My name's Juan Cueva. I'm with Action Potential Venture Capital, venture arm of GlaxoSmithKline. My background is a former scientist. I have a PhD in neurobiology and then worked in corporate development at a pharmaceutical company. Action Potential Venture Capital focuses on bioelectronic neuromodulation medical devices. So we are indication agnostic, but we are very interested in medical devices that use a modality of energy to treat disease. So that could be electric, electromagnetic, or acoustic. We have been around since 2013 and look to invest about 15 million over the lifetime of the investment. We're comfortable leading rounds and giving term sheets. We also take an active role in guiding and helping the startup through the difficult process of taking medical devices through PMA approval process. I think so. We like to invest Series A and B, although we have done some seed investments in the past. That was also just dependent on previous relationships with the entrepreneurs. And as a previous speakers have mentioned, I strongly encourage you to look at the Action Potential Venture Capital website to get a better idea for what would be a fit for us and what would fall within our investment mandate.
Terrific. Thank you, Juan. Rich, you'd like to round it out?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everybody. Hope all is well. My name is Richard Proscia. I'm an investor with Providence Ventures. We're the strategic venture fund of Providence St. Joseph Health, a large integrated payer provider, predominantly based here on the West Coast. If you couldn't tell by my Seattle background, we have about 300 million under management across 2 funds that we seek to invest in innovative solutions that are solving large problems within our corporate, or health, larger health system. We're largely stage agnostic. We've done everything from incubation stage deals to kind of late stage growth equity deals, but our sweet spot is really going to be within the, I would say, historical Series A through C range, although the nomenclature is largely lost on most of us these days. In terms of check sizes, varies. First check in between, I would say, anywhere between 5 and 10 million, and we look to get around 15 million to each of our portfolio companies over the lifetime of our investment. Similar to a lot of the other funds here, we can both lead, co-lead, participate as a strategic, in a larger round. We can kind of do all those things, and we invest, I would say, across the healthcare ecosystem, with the exception of life sciences. So we don't do biotech or pharma. None of us have the PhDs for it, but we do predominantly, oh, and sorry, I have a pup in the background who's apparently awake. Predominantly digital health, healthcare IT, tech-enabled services, and we've also started doing a lot more medical device or med tech investing as well. We expect that to grow as a percentage of our portfolio. And then, like my fellow panelists, I invite everyone to check out the Providence Ventures newly revamped website to learn a little bit more about our team, which I think is around 7-8 people now. Our kind of focus in our current portfolio, which is sitting around, I think, 25 companies now. But looking forward to today's conversation. Thanks, Nick.
Terrific. Thanks, Rich. And your pup is just as excited as everybody on this panel. So maybe we can look to you to kick off into the kind of the deeper level of discussion, and maybe you could share a little bit about some best practices around approaching you, kind of engaging you initially, and how to best kind of prepare for that first conversation so that the entrepreneur can give you, the best first look at the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say in terms of how to get in contact with the Providence Ventures team, any way you can. So, we respond to all of our LinkedIn messages. If you have our emails, definitely feel free to cold email us. If you know someone that we know, warm introductions are always helpful. I think other things to do in terms of things to prepare before you approach Providence Ventures, to really understand or to have a good perspective on who the right individuals within this large ecosystem that we work with. So all of our partners within the health system, and also the payer elements to our business as well, if that's more relevant, that would be best for you to talk to, or who's the right evangelist within this large integrated payer provider for us to kind of go to figure out, is the problem you're solving pertinent to a problem that we have or that we've seen. How important is that problem, especially from a budgetary perspective, with something in the wake of COVID? How do we prioritize this problem versus other problems? Having a really good perspective on that, and strong ROI cases or case studies never hurt, would be my recommendation of things to prepare, and pieces of data to have, or at least perspectives to have when you approach our team. And then just knowing that we're a very I wouldn't, hopefully some of my colleagues watch this, I think all contextual, but I think in comparison to other industries and verticals, even within our own vertical, health systems typically move a little bit slower than others. So understanding the elongated sales cycles and being ready to work with someone as large as Providence, I think is really important, and isn't right for every stage of a company's life cycle. So I would say, after you've already found a few customers, have really good case around ROI and are ready to implement, from a customer success team size and an implementation team size, your solution within, even one hospital or one region of something like a system like Providence, I think is a really important place for you to be, for our conversation to be meaningful, and for us to be able to make the right introductions to kind of right introductions that will gain traction within a health system like Providence. So those are off the top the things that I'd recommend before approaching us. But I think it's always a good time to start talking, even if it's not the right time for you to get an introduction into kind of the mothership. So definitely reach out at any stage, and we can have that conversation.
Short follow up to that: if
Yeah.
there's a KOL, a clinician in your group, in your kind of host of providers, is it better that the startup reach out to them and sell them before coming to you, or would you rather they connect with you and have you direct them to the right people if there's not already a previous relationship established?
It's a great question. I would say no preference necessarily. If you approach the physician or the operator or whoever the end user might be first and start to get traction there, it makes my job a lot easier. And, I think we can have a lot more meaningful conversation around, I spoke with this doctor, they seemed really excited, they had these questions, then I can circle back with that end user, not always doctor, to figure out, just learn more about their perspective and see what the opportunity scope, next steps might be. But we're always happy to make those introductions, especially because our team, manages those relationships internally, and we're having an ongoing cadence with all of the business units, all of the operators, some of the clinicians, to understand their problems, especially at the leadership level. So we know if something is kind of, in the realm of an existing problem and is a relevant introduction to make back internally as well. So, and we're always happy to do that. So no preference, I think, from our team's perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rich. Ben, relative to approaching you and your fund and maybe making a good first showing, do you have any tips?
I mean, similar to Rich, we're open to all mediums of communication. So please do reach out. I think the point he made about not necessarily just reaching out when you're fundraising, but actually ahead of that, I think is an important one. I think building a relationship over time is just really great, and we're always looking to support and help companies before that fundraising point. We're a bit different to Providence in that we invest a bit earlier. The corporate, as I said earlier, is relatively small, and our remit in terms of our investment focus is probably broader than what the corporate does. So InHealth is focused very much on the screening, diagnostics aspect of the pathway. We invest much more broadly than that, and so I think there's probably nothing specific I would say that more specific I would say than to reach out. And I think when it comes to that introduction, whether it's an email or some other form, and that first meeting, we're investing at seed, and so I think in that first meeting it's very much focusing on hitting all the key points around the team, the market, and the opportunity. Having a relatively pithy first presentation that leaves time for discussion and questions, and ensuring that there is I think as Rich said, a clarity on if possible what the fund focuses on, both in terms of ticket size, geography, investment focus, and so on. So I'd leave it at that.
Terrific. Thanks, Ben. You brought up an interesting point that it's good to have a longitudinal connection with the company before you're pressed for an investment decision. So there's a little bit of a tension between like, when are you ready to start talking to VCs versus when you're ready to start asking for money. So something perhaps for the audience to think about. And that kind of leads us to, I think, that a good follow-on question, and I'll direct this to Juan. What are some of well-intentioned actions, but maybe common errors that first-time founders make as they're first reaching out to you?
I like the way you pose that. It's well-intentioned, and maybe it's not so much an error, but just a misunderstanding. And picking up on the excellent comments made by Rich and Ben, and as you were focusing on the longitudinal part, maybe not anticipating the time it's going to take to build the relationship, not just with the venture arm, but with the relationships that we are managing internally. So with business unit leaders and building that strategic alignment. So not having enough time there in the process is perhaps something that is not anticipated. The CVCs, in addition to looking for a large market opportunity, a unique differentiated technology, something that's going to be groundbreaking, will also be managing the strong strategic alignment component. So that's something to be aware of, that takes time and could involve multiple types of relationships, not just a cash for equity, but perhaps a joint venture or a joint development agreement with a business unit. And one other subtlety is that I've noticed that oftentimes entrepreneurs are paranoid that coming in with this new idea and speaking to a venture arm of a multinational company may end up resulting in the company wanting to steal their secrets. And so they're very paranoid and holding their cards close to their chest. And just a couple of things there. It's much more risky and expensive for a multinational corporation to steal an idea from an entrepreneur. And there's actually much more that the corporation has to lose in terms of IP than the entrepreneur. I don't think that they see that. Of course, the entrepreneur, it's like this is their baby, so it's the most precious and special thing in the world. But understand that these large corporations spend billions of dollars on R&D and have their own innovations. And along those lines, coming in on the first conversation and expecting an NDA to be signed is just not, it's not going to happen. Being prepared for that first meeting, please have, in addition to doing your research on who you're speaking to and making sure that your technology fits within their investment mandate, also have non-confidential materials ready, including perhaps a pack of your peer-reviewed publications that will back up your science.
Terrific. Thanks so much for that. Juan, that IP and CDA issue really flares up for me. It's something that I face a lot, and so maybe my own public service announcement. Please follow your IP, and please, if you're not ready to have a conversation in a non-confidential way, say, "Hey, Juan, I'm excited to engage you on what we're working on. In 3 months, our IP is going to issue, or in 6 months, we're going to have this paper published, and at that time, it's going to be, a fine time for a non-confidential conversation." Miles, maybe would look to you to see if you have anything to add on that topic of maybe common well-intentioned challenges in a first reach out.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe I'll put a rounder note to kind of what we're already discussing here. I think the important piece for any entrepreneur is to be able to actually describe their value add non-confidentially right off the bat. If you can present to any investor why they should be investing in you on the front end, that makes the conversation a lot easier, obviously. And I invest in the therapeutics area, which in some ways can be difficult because we're talking about mechanisms of action, proof of concept trials, and a lot of data that really speak to, yes, this technology does work. Obviously, if your company is on the super early side and hasn't yet developed that type of data package, we will still, consider looking at you, but also have to respect that the company has some need for confidentiality at a certain level. That said, for a corporate venture arm perspective, I rely heavily on some of our drug development colleagues to give experts advice on specific areas of interest. And so the more that I can share with them non-confidentially to kind of gut check my own read on your technology, the better, right? And so I think what I'm in a roundabout way saying is coming to the table with a hyper protective or limited presentation isn't necessarily going to do you favors in terms of progressing a conversation. Obviously, highly respect the need for confidentiality and proprietary nature. I didn't go into my background, but I'm a neuroscientist, but also a JD MBA as an attorney specializing in IP historically. So obviously respect the needs for what's happening there, but I think at the same time, in preparing your conversation with any venture investor, not just corporate venture arms, all venture investors are very, very hesitant to sign NDAs because they have to look across, one, a broad spectrum of technologies, but two, they also sit on boards of other companies, and they have to be very careful about fiduciary duties, but also respecting confidentiality. So it is a touchy subject. So I just highlight, the better you can speak non-confidentially, and the more information that you can include, confidently, the better the conversation is likely going to go on the first glance, but fully acknowledge, at some point you have to enter some sort of agreement about confidentiality. I think the other common thing that is very helpful for an entrepreneur on the front end, and this I think goes across the board. I used to consult in this area where I would sit down with an entrepreneur and build out project finance plans. So I used to be a bit of a spreadsheet jockey of sorts. But what that really does is it challenges you to think about what you're going to need to develop your company, and put hard financial numbers, as opposed to a little bit too hand wavy round numbers that will be tested when your business plan is discussed in real time. So I know it's an effort, and sometimes it's archaic and sometimes frustrating because you can't get actual numbers, but I really encourage entrepreneurs to talk to consultants, get an understanding of what the projects you're proposing, what the company's trajectory really is going to look like. And maybe you can't do a 5-year plan. It'd be nice if you could, on a full, financial model basis. That can be a little bit, fudging of numbers. But at least in my context of a therapeutic, if you have a lead asset that you're intending to push towards the clinic, I'm going to be very keen to understanding, what type of efforts and what the costs are going to be. And to me, that demonstrates that you've actually thought out your company goals. And maybe that I preach to the choir, everyone knows this, but I just highlight that because that's really a non-starter. If someone hasn't really taken the time to speak to experts and at least getting a broad sense for your use of proceeds and how capital efficient you can or cannot be, fully acknowledging, you might have to I hate to use the word pad numbers, but you do have to kind of add in some margin for error, and presume things will go wrong. So I think that's a really important bit outside of all of the technological speak, all of the market speak. If you at a baseline cash flow level haven't gone through that effort, I really encourage you to do so, because that's going to be something that is going to come up in conversation, if not the first time, definitely the second connection point.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I really love what Miles just said, and definitely want to echo that and extend it a little further, not just with the financial and putting deep thought into that, but also because we invest in medical devices, and I think Miles invests in therapeutics, also have a really good eye and thought towards the regulatory approval process, the type of data that you're going to need to collect to get that, the cost of that, and importantly, the reimbursement. What are the codes that are out there? This is part of your model development. And so really knowing what reimbursement codes may exist and the challenges that may come up if you're going to have to get your own code for this. And that just adds more time, and time is money. But I just wanted to add that subtlety.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. I was once a medical device entrepreneur, so you're spot on. Reimbursement's the name of the game there. And I think to put a point on the therapeutic side, talking to regulatory plans, regulatory strategy, and the implications of that, in many cases are really important. It depends on how early we're participating, and in many cases, Takeda invests in platform technologies that are far away from the regulatory environment and clinical path. So in that context, I would say make sure your execution plans include adequate planning, even to prove out your platform and proof of concept, and identifying what tests are really going to show what in terms of the technology's capability and what those costs are.
So, Miles, thanks for that, and only because, Miles, you a self-proclaimed spreadsheet lover. So you start with top down, then you go bottoms up, you build your model up, and you talked about the possibility that things might not go perfectly. When the company's approaching you with their more granular view, do you prefer to have that be the zeroth order model if things go perfectly, already have built in some contingency funds for things not going perfect, and or another 6 to 9 months to raise that next round, or you want to have that conversation later?
Nick, that's a great point. So something that actually that's an oversight that many neglect is monthly burn until the next financing. So understanding that is important. I think all investors really acknowledge that that's the case. So it wouldn't be a surprise to them. But in terms of build in, when I look at a company's plans, I think we always acknowledge that science is hard, and that the readouts are not guaranteed on any scientific experiment. I think the important bit, though, is to understand what absolute costs are, what additional time to execute when contracts don't come to fruition in terms of a vendor or something like that. But just understanding what the baseline costs are is most important first. You can add a layer on operating overtime, so to speak, to that model. So I think there's actually two subsets of planning. Obviously, you need to know what your absolute costs are for scientific execution, one way or another. And then I think there's a layer on top of that that always exists that involves the potential for things to go wrong, and understanding that. And I think just having a healthy attitude, everyone is excited about their technology and is exudes confidence that there's a path here. But I also think that having a very firm understanding of where things go wrong and solutions in terms of navigating that, it goes a long way, particularly when having a conversation with investors. It's actually quite impressive to understand and have that conversation in terms of planning and understanding, because frankly, we're joining your team, right? We're an investor. We want to get on board and we want to work with you. And we're in the same boat. And so knowing that our investment is going to have legs even when things go wrong is actually a pretty powerful message that an entrepreneur can convey.
Gotcha. Terrific. Thanks for that, Miles. Sort of building on kind of the next stage, you've met, you've pitched, and you've made an investment, things are going well. The entrepreneur, I'll turn this to you, Ashley, might look at Mckesson and say, okay, large company, and for a small company that's got a few million in the bank, Mckesson probably looks like they have unlimited funding. What's a reasonable level of expectation for either follow-on investment or onboarding, kind of even when things are going, very, very smooth. Maybe you could kind of frame out the, hey, this is how we look at things when there's a bump in the road. And also, when things are going swimmingly, what are our hopes and aspirations for a thing that we invest in? I'm sorry, Ashley, you're on mute.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Unfortunately, the first person to say that question in this meeting. So at Mckesson Ventures, we are definitely an active follow-on investor that we want to support our companies, and we try to make that to be a frictionless process from an investment perspective too, usually reserving that allocation upfront to show our support, but also knowing that that is going to happen in the future and wanting to be able to move quickly. And I may have mentioned in the beginning, we typically invest up to a lifetime of 20 million over our investments. And so it just depends on the stage and the growth and investment, but that's definitely part of our investment strategy and wanting to support our companies as they scale. And to the point about the onboarding, after the investment is made, we at Mckesson Ventures, maybe specific to our fund, we have 2 team members who are focused on portfolio development. And their full-time job is really to work with our investment companies after the investment is made and try to figure out really where the commercial synergies are, how to navigate the broader enterprise. And I would say, it can really depend whether that is a near-term opportunity. Sometimes it's more of an evangelist role. Sometimes it's really thinking about where it could be, 3, 5, et cetera, years out, but really helping to figure out where to seed those, put those seeds of thought into the organization and begin to grow that together. And I'd say the key to success with that is that it doesn't happen at the time of investment, right? It really happens in the diligence process and even before that, to some of the points made earlier about starting conversations earlier. And because we're more strategic in some of our investments or in all of our investments, is we sort of understand and have a strong understanding of the goals of where the company is and think about how that overlaps with the goals of the internal business units and where that growth could be. So the key to success in that onboarding process is really starting that earlier on and having the right internal conversation for time of execution, which is after the investment is made. And hopefully that lends itself to a smoother handoff as well. So I think all of that is part of then seeding the foundation and trust, communication, and whether things are up or down in supporting our companies. And that has been just a key element in how we think about working with our portfolio companies is sort of coming together from the beginning and building that foundational trust and showing our support, whether it be financially or through these conversations that I've talked about in the different stages.
Gotcha. Thank you. Maybe one question on the onboarding angle. When you make an investment, are things that you invest in automatically, we're considering onboarding this in 2, 3, whatever the next stage is, or are there a set of investments that are, hey, this looks like a very interesting area, this is an exciting team, we want to stay close to it, we're going to invest and kind of see where things go? So, and maybe it's not black and white, but I'm sort of curious, if you have a thesis about onboarding at the start.
Yeah, I think it varies. Our portfolio is 30 plus companies, and they can't all have the same strategy from the stage or a go-to-market perspective or even a portfolio development perspective. So I think just if you think about managing a portfolio and thinking about making bets in different stages and that sort of thing, it completely varies. Like I mentioned, some of them will be a little bit more near-term in certain terms of commercial opportunity, but some of them certainly could be more centered on bets in the industry, let's say 3, 5, 10 years out from now, and sort of keeping an eye on them and helping the team to grow and see that opportunity. So really more of a portfolio perspective and a varied bet.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Rich, was wondering if maybe you could share some thoughts on what your approach is to follow on investing, and maybe, to what degree you help with syndicate building, et cetera, for your portfolio companies.
Yeah, great question. Actually, I was going to chime in without it as well. So very similar to Ashley, our team reserves kind of upfront as we're investing, in our first check into each of our portfolio companies, a sizable sidecar or allocation, whatever you want to call it, to kind of support all of our portfolio companies through the life cycle of our investment. The size of that sidecar and the size of our first check in varies based off of, stage, size of the financing, our allocation, and everything in between. Again, we try to get, I think, I'd say up to 15 million into each of our portfolio companies over the lifetime of our investment, depending on which stage we're coming in at and what role we're playing in that kind of syndicate at that time in that financing will kind of dictate what check we're writing and how much we're reserving. But I think an important part, and something that's, Nick, you kind of, I think we're trying to get at this with your question, something that's, I think, grown in importance, especially in a post-COVID environment with a very frothy market that's being driven by all of this activity, especially the surge of some of the publicly traded comps, at least especially for our team and the software and digital health companies that we like to invest in. There's I think one of the roles that we've started to play, especially as we move into that lead or co-lead role, is really trying to help entrepreneurs and their executive teams understand that there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of different funds that you can get checks from, and there's a lot of different implications and expectations, I think, when you are taking money from certain players in the market. And I think that being really smart around who is in that syndicate and who you're bringing around, your board, into your boardroom and around that table is going to grow in importance, especially, as the market slows probably potentially over the next few years. And I think some of our non-healthcare focused brethren in the VC world, is what I'll call it, don't have the same expectations as those investors that have been historically investing in healthcare, understand the bumps in the road, obstacles, and sorry guys, bumps in the road, obstacles, and
good way to highlight it.
Exactly. He's also pretty passionate about this as well. Elongated sales cycles that can plague companies in the space, especially those that are going through regulatory processes, to kind of echo what Ben and Miles was saying before, but also for those that are trying to prove out their ROI through various case studies and efficacy studies. Even if you're not going down a regulatory pathway, it's really important to have those health economic studies, especially for software where they can be a little bit looser at times. And all of that takes time. And having a team and a syndicate that understands that ahead of time and is kind of prepared for that long journey and to support the entrepreneurs through that long journey versus, trying to get to some astronomical exit in 5 to 7 years, I think is really important. So knowing that and being cognizant of who you're bringing into your boardroom, I think is really important. I'll get off my soapbox now, but I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle these days.
Thanks a lot, Rich. As investments are made and the company starts to go on its journey, certain challenges obviously will pop up. And Ben was wondering if you could weigh in on what some of the common early challenges are and how to best engage the board, engage you when those things surface, both in terms of how and when to come to you with a problem and how to work through those things.
Sure, there are definitely lots of challenges. I think what I'd say is I think it's incumbent on both the investors that are coming into the round and the company to, in that investment process, ensure that it's as rigorous and robust as possible. I think on the investor side, ensuring that there is a proper diligence across the different aspects of the business, and I think on the company side, seeing that process is something that can be additive for them, and provide the ability to really highlight key areas of focus post-investment. And I think that is, no one wants to have surprises after they've invested, and I think the best investors will ensure that doesn't happen. I think it relates to that. As a kind of quasi-corporate investor, we certainly are very clear up front around the type of value we can have and the relationship we're looking to have with the company and at what stage. And that can fit into various categories. To the early discussion, it can be quite an early partnership. It can be a longer term discussion around a strategic venture, or it can be softer aspects around how we help a company in the way that an institutional would. And I think that expectations management is something we're keen to set up front with companies when we invest. I mean, we are pretty proactive with how we work with our portfolio companies. We look to engage on a consistent basis from day one. So I think we want to see the problems early, and we want to help companies, particularly at the seed stage, to work through those, because they will be inevitable. And I think it's incumbent on founders to be, I think, particularly early on, is transparent as possible around the challenges that they see coming up, and so that those discussions can be had around the board table or outside of the board to address them.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ben. Was wondering, a question that might be on everyone's mind is, relative to process and timing to fund, are there major differences between a private venture firm, a typical shop, versus a corporate venture arm? And Juan was wondering if you might be able to share your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and I can answer from two perspectives. Prior to Action Potential, which is a corporate venture arm, but operates like an institutional investor, so just all the metrics are financially driven. But prior to this, I was an investment manager at Applied Ventures, the venture arm of Applied Materials, which was much more strategic and had concerns and issues, or not issues, but need to have strong strategic alignment. So the time varies quite a bit, and that is mostly a function of the need to build a strong strategic relationship with the company. And I think that is one of the things that is important to consider in terms of the timeline and the turnaround that it would take to complete the investment. So the corporate VC may need to have more time to rally internal support to build those business unit alignments, potential projects, to identify key opinion leaders within the company and also champions within the company for that particular investment.
Thanks, Juan. Miles, is that similar to what you face, or is it materially different?
Yeah, it's certainly a different environment when you have to be strategically aligned, first off, right? So I think my biggest challenge is getting really excited about really interesting science and opportunities and actually ways to help patients that are outside of the remit. The challenge at Takeda Ventures, and I think for many corporate venture arms, is how closely they are aligned or not. There are many corporate venture arms that are actually focused completely off strategy, and that's intentional. For Takeda Ventures, our metrics are really very much tied to pipeline entry. So that's the reason we invest in platform. So our goal is to bring a platform forward enough to develop assets that actually might be interested to our BD colleagues. So there's all sorts of strategies that a corporate arm could have, And Takeda has viewed that as the most optimal for our overarching business model for Takeda broadly. So we sit under the Center for External Innovation, and I work very closely with our business development colleagues and our drug development teams. As a result, my alignment with downstream either usage for our pipeline, so technologies that will enable or answer a problem associated with a development challenge, or specific therapeutics that are going to be either follow on in our pipeline usage, or novel space, first in class type of thing. Those do have to align with our therapeutic interest, because obviously it feeds forwards into the rest of the Takeda company. So I think functionally different from a broader strategy that a typical VC might have. And I think a big question that a lot of folks have when they're working with the corporate venture arm, are there strings attached, right? Do we have to have some exclusivity to Takeda? And in fact, that fortunately is not something we build in to any of our investments. We're a straightforward investment group. No strings. You don't have to, at the end of the day, if we sit on the board, we have to make decisions in the best interest of the company. And we have had scenarios where, frankly, the best buyer for our investment was not Takeda. Someone was willing to pay a heck of a lot more, and that's the decision that had to be made. So I think that's a concern that comes up, but frankly, at the end of the day, the fiduciary responsibility is to do the best for the company and for your investment. There is a neat thing, though, I will say, in accessing a corporate venture arm that is different from a traditional VC, particularly in the case of developing clinical assets or preclinical assets. And something that I try to leverage as much as possible. We have tremendous resources scientifically at Takeda, and we do, for our portfolio companies, engage those resources to help enable their development. Secondarily, there are some really novel deal constructs that are occurring where early stage companies come to us, and they've already caught the eye of our search and evaluation team, or our drug development team, or our BD team, but they're just not developed enough to do a licensed transaction because an asset just is not there. So we actually have developed an approach where we'll strike a collaboration early, and we know that the company is in fundraising mode as well. So we'll actually build in a collaboration to focus on a certain area of interest that our colleagues have, while simultaneously participating in the equity round. Right. So that helps the company kind of twofold. One, you're filling out your financing, and two, you've stepped up the game right off the bat with a partnership with a big pharma. So that's kind of a novelty that a lot of people aren't necessarily using broadly, but it's something that we found to be actually quite effective for everybody.
That's terrific. And that R&D collaboration that happens separate from the equity investment, will that be non-dilutive dollars with some different rights, information rights perhaps, or how do you look at that flow of funds and scope of work?
Yeah, it really does depend. Often, if there's an equity participation, it's going to be dilutive dollars, but I think downstream milestones, et cetera, built into the potential collaboration or option to license or something are obviously non-dilutive, right? So I think it's kind of a mixed mode, and it is case by case in that context.
Rich, what's the process look on your side in terms of advocacy building, time to invest, given the internal team that you need to align? And one of the things that Miles mentioned is that often strategics will have key subject matter experts in science or regulatory, et cetera. Given your network, I would imagine a deep set of experience both on the clinical side and the workflow side and kind of purchasing sensibilities. I was wondering if you could speak to that as well. So I've given you kind of a two-part.
Yeah, definitely. So, and keep me honest, make sure I'm answering all of your question. So, I think similarly to a lot of the other funds here, Our team is benchmarked off of our financial returns, but the way that we think we add additional value or capital plus is by aligning that strategic piece ahead of time, and where we can be that additional value add for our portfolio companies ahead of our investments. But we typically, I would say, separate the two into, like, I would call it, strategic diligence and investment diligence. On the investment diligence side, assuming strategic diligence is no longer a barrier or an obstacle we have to diligence alongside our investment, our team can move as quickly as any other fund from an investment diligence perspective in terms of customer calls, financial diligence, legal diligence, and everything in between. We can I think match and go at the pace of a normal fund with respect to all of the diligence related to a typical financing. I think I think when entrepreneurs are engaging in strategic and when they hope to get the additional value around that strategic element, and the strategic diligence can take a lot longer, and it really depends on the stage of the company, but also the scope and their current relationship and introduction and commercial traction within the health system. If it's something that our team has to help facilitate and make those introductions and help shepherd along within the health system or the payer group here, that's going to take anywhere from a couple months at best to we typically like to start conversations as early as possible, so that we're helping shepherd the company through the health system, or we make those introductions and they kind of update us on the progress over a certain 6 to 12 months, and then as the next financing approaches, we're well positioned to participate in that financing, having a good understanding around what the strategic conversations look like internally, how far those conversations have progressed, what the timeline around some sort of commercial relationship, co-development opportunity, partnership, anything in between looks like between the health system and that company, and then what the timeline around when that inflection point can be expected to occur looks like, I think are all elements that we'd like to have a perspective on before we invest. To your point, Nick, we leverage the collective knowledge base within the health system for a variety of things as we're looking at investment opportunities. First and foremost, I think it's a really great diligence piece, that we can use, in our investment memos to give a I think undiluted, very candid perspective directly from our operators, our clinicians, and everyone in between, on what how well they're if they're using the product or the solution, the software, if they're enjoying it, what their perspective is on it, pros, cons, the user experience, the ROI that it's adding, how it replaced, or if it replaced another solution, how it compares to that other solution, and then if the team did a kind of long-standing or typical RFP process, what were the learnings from that RFP process? How did they come to the conclusion that this was the right tech to bring in the health system, the right tech to solve this problem? Even if the final conclusion was all of the competitors in the space were great, but this was the cheapest solution, that's still really helpful from us to that's really helpful feedback to give back to the entrepreneurs from a sales and marketing perspective. You guys are well positioned, but we think price compression could be an issue here, as there is a big purchasing decision around price, that at least we got from our health system, and that may not be the case across the ecosystem, but it was a case here, and kind of use that as additional feedback for your sales and marketing team. But we also leverage them to help us identify interesting areas and to write our investment thesis. Our clinicians and our kind of clinical experts and operational experts are often, surfacing problems to us to kind of fill the hopper of, here's where we're writing our long form theses around, and the stages and subsets of healthcare that our team is kind of going out and looking for kind of solutions to solve those problems for. We also leverage them for, I would say, that proactive sourcing piece as well, similar to some of my co-panelists have mentioned. So I'll pause there. Hopefully I answered all your question, but happy to dig deeper, double click on anything I mentioned.
Maybe just a quick double click
Yeah.
on pricing. You mentioned pricing, and again, given your network, how much support can you provide there in guiding, you know, a new clinical device indication, you know, around what you know, your network sensibilities are?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's hard. It's harder to talk about in the abstract. We do work with our portfolio companies, you know, both during the diligence phase as well as, you know, post diligence. We like to think of ourselves as a full service venture fund, not in the same respect that Andreessen is, but, you know, in the way that we like to work with our portfolio companies post investment, roll up our sleeves and help with everything from hiring to market research to, you know, subsequent financing support and preparations to, you know, last year I was building financial models to help, you know, sensitize the impact of COVID on sales cycles and how that would influence cash burn and things like that. So we've done it all. In terms of sorry, I just lost my train of thought. The pricing in particular, we've helped a lot of our portfolio companies do pricing studies. You know, I think during the diligence phase, we're talking with as many current customers and prospective customers as we possibly can to get a sense for ROI. And then we usually like to figure out, you know, how that ROI ties back to the pricing model, the business model, and the pricing strategy of, you know, the company that we're looking at, and then sensitize that versus the trajectory of, you know, business models and pricing that we've seen in similar markets. So, and I'm being very, very vague here. A lot of the companies I look at are in the software space, and I think it's a little bit different versus, you know, some of the med tech, you know, companies and some of the life sciences companies. But for software companies in particular, understanding, you know, ROI and looking at the pricing models and the price points of similar solutions in this space, I think is all very important, because you can get an understanding of, you know, how health systems think about the value add of these softwares, and having a strong ROI case study, I think, can really help protect and solidify pricing for some of these companies. And then we've helped do some of those pricing studies and you know, post investment as well, both working with internal colleagues, but also, you know, our syndicate partners and trying to figure out what, you know, the risk of price compression, price expansion opportunities as well, you know, as the company builds out their product portfolio and rolls out new offerings in addition to what they're currently offering as well. So we've helped with all of that stuff.
Gotcha. Terrific, Rich. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley, wanted to talk to you a little bit. We touched on syndicate building earlier, and maybe a riff on that. Building a syndicate is part of building your team of both investors and board members. And sometimes, you know, emerging companies might be strong in some areas, particularly the science, but perhaps less so on the business side of things, or in other areas. Was wondering if you could share your approach to either supporting the company from building a syndicate of investors or helping them round out their management team.
Yeah, sure. It really depends on the investment at Mckesson Ventures. I mean, we have times where, excuse me, we've come across investments that we really like and don't have the appetite for, where we help to look for a co-lead or other investors. And so it's really about thinking about our team and our network, and thinking about investors that we have interacted with in the past, worked with in the past, and depending on age and size of that company, really where we think what type of syndicate to come together to help that company at that stage, whether that's financial, strategic, depending on the industry, depending on expertise that can be involved. But we are a small team across 30 plus investments, and so we usually do come in as part of a syndicate, and it's as a result, the makeup of the syndicate is something we're actively always thinking about. More recently, just given the environment we're in, we've seen growth equity come into our space more. And so that's been an interesting evolution of the syndicate building process and sort of who we've co-invested with. That hasn't necessarily been part of the environment a couple of years ago. So I'll pause there. I know we're tight on time.
Yep. Thanks for noticing we're at the very back end. I want to thank you, Ashley, and the rest of the panelists Miles, Ben, Juan, Rich, for a very lively discussion and some great answers. Hopefully we've given this group a sense for what it's like to engage corporate venture capital, and I'm sure we'll all be delighted to talk and engage with audience members that have things that might fit our strategic interests. And again, we'll encourage everyone to look at our websites where we try to call out the areas that are in our strategic focus and roadmap. So thanks everyone